Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Black Real Estate Dialogue podcast. I'm very excited about this episode. Here with me, I have Kasondra Milton out of Alexandria, Virginia. Cassandra, thank you so much for joining the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm
Definitely.
excited.
Definitely. I'm excited too. So first, we'd just like to learn more about what your childhood was like and what you saw or maybe what you didn't see that shaped your view of building wealth.
Okay, that's a very good question. I grew up in Rochester, New York, two-family household. I am a first-generation college graduate, so I would say that growing up in terms of wealth, what I was kind of taught is you go to college, you go to college, you go to college, because I was the first one to go.
Hmm.
Um, my parents always owned a home, and they really, even to this day, kind of prescribe to, you buy a house and then, you get some equity and then you move up to the next level and you sell that one eventually and move up to the next level. Um, I was probably, yeah, I was the first person to really start thinking outside the box to say, okay, outside of kind of owning your own primary property, let's think about other things. My parents definitely always taught me about saving money, definitely, and definitely owning a house, but not really getting into the investment side. Even with stocks, I was kind of told do your 401k, but not necessarily kind of venturing off to own my own portfolio of stocks. So I would say that I have a pretty good basic information that I kind of grew up with in terms of investing in general, but definitely I had to go out and seek a bit to expand on that.
Definitely. So you, one thing you mentioned, I think is really key, um, that you were also the first to kind of think outside the box. So what was it for you that, gave you that motivation or that curiosity to think outside the box? Because, it probably would have been fine if you did what you saw, you probably would have been just fine. But what was it for you that was like, you know what, I think there's a little bit more, a little bit further I can take this.
I would definitely say once I went away to college, one of the greatest things I would say about my college experience was meeting other people that had similar interests in terms of wanting to do better with their lives and just kind of gleaning from them. I think that when I relocated to the Washington, D.C. area, that was also like clutch for me because, it was an experience like no other where I was no longer a unicorn. There was a whole bunch of, Black folks that were, kind of doing their thing, whether it was, you have a lot of college educated people here, but then you also have a lot of entrepreneurs here in general. So I think that being around other young people who were, interested in doing something a bit different than just kind of sticking to the 9 to 5, I think helped me tremendously to start seeking more information and just utilizing that network, just learning little pieces from different people that I met who were, kind of doing something different and outside of just, we're going to be engineers and do the 9 to 5 thing, which is a great thing to do. I still have my engineering job. But I think that it was definitely great for me to get those other perspectives and start looking outside of just what I had been taught, which is you work somewhere for a certain amount of time and then you retire with your 401k or pension or whatever the case may be.
Definitely. Just out of curiosity, what kind of engineering do you do?
Software.
Nice. I'm sure that's a great place to be in these days.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Awesome. Um, so walk us through the beginning. What was it like, buying your first property, that whole experience? Tell us more about how that was.
Okay. So when I first started thinking about buying a property, when I graduated from college, I was 21, fresh out of school, and I said, Dad, I want to buy a two-family house. And I remember he told me I should wait until I get a husband to buy a house. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. so, and so what I did is I utilized an FHA and I purchased a townhouse in Northern Virginia.
Mm,
This was in 2004. And my plan was essentially live in that house for about a year and then rent it out and buy your next one. So a lot of people call it house hacking. So essentially that was my plan. I purchased that house, lived in it for exactly 12 months. In the summer of 2005, I went and purchased a condo and rented out the townhouse. And after that, the market crashed. So I actually was forced into becoming a landlord, and it kind of just blossomed from there. But that's essentially how it started, using that FHA, putting down, I think it's 3.5%, and just having that strategy of live there for a year, but go on to the next one, and let's just keep growing. I definitely have more of a buy and hold type of mentality, so I was never really interested in flipping it. It was more or less, let's see what we can acquire along the way by utilizing that strategy. So that's how I started out.
For sure. And you mentioned that also during that period of time, the market crashed. What was it like at that time, like for you, just having those properties and things probably seeming like it changed overnight?
Yeah, it was crazy. So it was the best learning situation though. Like, like I said, I was very young at the time. I purchased the property, and at the time, like, I bought my first townhouse. I think I spent 237 for it. Within a year, it went up to 350. I should have, in hindsight, I wish I would have sold it, but I held on to it and rented it out. And then, like I said, I bought the condo. I bought the condo for 240. The following year, a lot of people always say 2008 is the year that the market crashed. 2006, you felt it. The following year, which was '06, I went to try to sell it, and it was already down about 10, 15,000. At the time, nobody really thought it was going to crash in the way that it did. So I was kind of like, oh, I'll wait it out, and it'll go back up. By 2008, they were selling for like 60, $70,000. So a property that I spent around 250 for was essentially going for, that's peanuts compared to what I spent on, for it. And history, the market crash lasted, for quite some time before it actually rebounded. During that time, I did take advantage of buying, a couple other properties, and that's when I started to move more into the multifamily realm instead of single family properties. But it was definitely a crazy time. It was a crazy time when it was going before the market crash, because the moment that a property would go on the market, I'm talking like the first day, there would be like 20 contracts on it. People were bidding like $20,000 over asking. Like,
Wow.
it was like bananas. And like I said, when it crashed, it crashed. Even the property that I said went up from 237 to 350 in one year, that went down to like 50, 60,000 too. So I mean, these properties dropped, and when they dropped so much that it was scary. It was like, okay, when is this ever going to rebound? And what am I going to do with this property that I owe X amount on, and it's only worth a third or a fourth of what I paid for it. So it was a crazy time, but I learned so much from it. If something like that ever happens again, I'm like going all in.
Yeah,
That's what I learned. Go all in. I wish I would have gone and bought like 20 of those properties, back then. But at the time, like I said, I was very young and just wasn't thinking in that way. I was more fearful of it versus looking at the opportunity.
for sure, for sure. Were you able to keep those properties at that time during the market
Yes.
crash?
Yes, so during the market crash, I was able to keep it because I mean the rental market was still pretty strong.
Mm.
So I never had a problem renting it. Especially Northern Virginia is such a transient area. There's always people in and out. You have the military bases. My vacancy rate here was like pretty much zero. Like, I never had a problem with vacancies. So I just decided to ride it out. I know a lot of people did like short sales and things of that nature. I was more inclined to keep my credit right. So I never even thought about doing a short sale or trying to, just force a foreclosure. So I just held on to it, and I ended up, one of them I actually just sold in November. I'm doing a 1031 exchange with it, and I made six figures on it. So I mean, if writing it out for me was the best option,
Right.
because eventually it rebounds, and then you're
Mm.
building equity on it as you make payments and things of that nature. So I mean, for me, I just rolled it out. I just rode the wave.
Definitely. Got it. Got it. So you also mentioned that you were able to pick up a couple properties during that period of time, the market crash. Can you talk to us more about that and what that was like? Because a lot of people may be too afraid or kind of hesitant to kind of scoop up properties during a time like that, even though to some it might seem like the obvious thing to do.
Mhm. So, like I said, in hindsight, it's definitely the right thing to do. I wish I would have picked up more. So basically, once the market crashed, I started to look towards my hometown. Um, Northern Virginia is so expensive in general, anyway. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the DC market, but the DC market is like really expensive. So I started looking at my hometown, Rochester, New York. In terms of how can I leverage some of the properties there. Rochester is a place that it's a medium-sized city. I think the metro area is about 1 million people. That's the metro area. The city proper, maybe 250,000 people. So not a huge city. And so what typically happens with more of those smaller, medium-sized cities is they don't feel the crashes in the way that the large cities feel. So the properties there had crashed a little bit, but it was still, not as risky, I felt, because it wasn't crashing in the way that it was in other places. And the first multifamily property that I bought up there, I bought a two-family and it was $70,000. So I'm like, you can't really beat that. It's a two-family. It was renting for 700 on each side. This was 2010, and it was $70,000. So that
Wow.
was the first multifamily property that I purchased, and it was a great investment. The property has since gone up quite a bit, but the Rochester market is actually Rochester, Buffalo, Cleveland, all those cities in that Great Lakes region are still, to me, fairly inexpensive when you really think about the amount of rent that comes in as compared to the price. So I started to just focus on the Rochester area, knowing that it's probably not going to fall too much. And I was right. Essentially, I bought it in 2010. It didn't fall at all, actually. It just continued to kind of moderately go up, which was, great for me. And once I did that, the rest is kind of history. I've always focused mainly on Rochester. I've thought about other areas, but I would say one of the biggest things for me is knowing the area, because I thought about Baltimore, right? Baltimore is right now, a lot of people are talking about Baltimore being the next gentrified place.
Mhm.
But for me, I like to know the city because I can, if somebody tells me a street in Rochester, I know, okay, if you're on that particular street, once you get to that street, it may be a little different than if you're, a little bit south, right? I know it, I know the city very well. So it was easy for me to kind of capitalize on the market at that time and know which areas to invest in. So that was kind of my strategy during the market crash, and I just continued to do that. I don't think my strategy has actually changed very much since then, because for me, like I said, I really am into the more buy and hold strategy anyway. So yeah.
Definitely. Is a couple follow-up questions. But the first thing is something you mentioned, I think is very important that people kind of gloss over. A lot of people want to go for what's popular. They want to go for, what's in the news, what's online, as far as like where to invest. Um, but they forget something that you mentioned. It's important to know the city. It's important to know the city and not just like blindly invest just because someone said it was cool or you thought it was a good idea. It's important to know the city. So I think it's great that you mentioned that, and I'm sure knowing the city has helped you as you've continued to grow your portfolio out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know I communicate with a lot of other people who venture into the real estate world. And I remember a friend of mine, this is maybe 2 years ago, and the person mentioned somewhere in Milwaukee. It was some city I had never even heard of. And I'm just like, I don't know anyone there. Like, it's not even just knowing the area, but also who's gonna like fix things. Like you need to know contractors, right? And Rochester, I have family there. If there's ever something, that I need something, that it's an emergency item, I can call somebody, if the property management company isn't working out and I need a stopgap in the middle, it makes it a lot easier when you're familiar there with that area, people there, and all I kept thinking about, I mean, I don't know how cheap this property is and wherever it is in Wisconsin, but I don't know anyone there. I don't know anything about Wisconsin, to know the neighborhood, to know anything. And especially with contractors, like you have to have more than one contractor. There are times where my go-to person is busy or, just not doing something as quickly as I would need them to do it because of, whatever else is going on. Like I had a situation last month where my main contractor ended up contracting coronavirus. And it was in the middle of me doing an apartment turnaround for a new tenant that was coming in. Okay, let me call my backups. So for me personally, I think it's very important to invest in a place that you're familiar with.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you mentioned that got the two family in Rochester and continue to expand in that area. Can you talk to us more about how things grew from there?
Okay. So from there, I purchased the first one, kind of wanted to see what I thought about. I really wanted to understand the business, right? So I managed everything on my own at first, just so that I had a really good understanding of, the ups and downs of being a landlord to number one, know if I wanted to continue to go down this path, right? And then number two, to have a better understanding of what type of tenants that I want to attract, what type of things that they like in terms of being able to raise the rent in a particular area, so just so that I can really understand the whole process of being a landlord. So I kind of just wrote out that one property for a little bit before starting to invest. My strategy was really to buy one property per year. I wanted to continue to grow, but I wanted to do it in a way where it was manageable for me personally, especially since I know a lot of people talk about using other people's money. I had the capital to tap in because I had the other properties. So I was kind of using it as my own bank, so to speak. So I had, other ways that I can do things. Yep, I can use, the other people's money type of construct, or I can do refinances, or I can tap into, my stock portfolio, or when I get a bonus from work. So I think that one of the positive things about kind of having the job too is it helps in terms of lending. I never have a problem in terms of acquiring more properties. So I did it kind of slow and steady. So just one property every year, always multifamily. I have a mix of either two families and four families. And I just kind of mix it up from there once per year, every summer. That's kind of the time that I purchase property. um, and essentially I have two real estate agents that I work with in the Rochester area. So they know when it's time for me to start looking and kind of help me in terms of navigating through deals. Of course, I don't necessarily go up to Rochester every single time I'm looking. So I have one of my realtors I actually went to high school with. So he'll go and take the video of the property. Definitely I think it's great to have people that you trust. So he'll call me and say, I don't think you really want to mess with that one. Or yes, this one is a good property, go hard. So I've essentially utilized that for it's been 10 years now,
Wow.
that I've been kind of venturing into the multifamily space. So that's really how we've been doing it. So every year, I'm married now. I wasn't in 2010, but I got married in 2013. So it's now a we. I
Yeah.
got talked my husband into getting involved in this too. And we just again pick up a new property every single year. This year, right now, we're actually growing a bit more than usual. I think I noted that at the beginning when I bought my very first property, we sold that one back in November, and we're doing a 1031 exchange, which means that we had to buy more properties, by a certain date. So we're in the process right now of closing on 8 two-family houses. So this will be a big year for us in terms of increasing our portfolio.
Did you say eight two family houses?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, because yeah, with the 1031 exchange, you have to have everything on contract within 45 days. They don't really give you much time to lallygag, and then we have to close within 180 days of sell. So yes, so we're in the process right now of
Wow.
closing on these properties.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, my eyes opened up a little. I'm like, wait, what did she say?
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So there's a couple things, couple gems in there that you mentioned. So one thing you mentioned, right, is that you prefer to go with one property a year, and that you kind of use some of your own funds or from work or from other properties. And I don't want to gloss over that, because there's a lot, there's a lot. You're on Instagram, we're on the internet, there's a lot of people doing amazing things, right? um, but I think for the average person, it's very easy to compare yourself to other people. It's very easy to feel like you're not doing enough because you see someone is getting two, three houses every quarter.
Hmm.
But one house a year could be one, two, three doors for a decade. It's 30 units. And you mentioned,
Exactly.
like, appreciation, being able to sell certain properties, and now you're selling a property you've had for a long time. You're about to buy 16 units via 1031 exchange. So I think the big thing that I don't want people to miss is patience, and like running your own race. You probably would have never
Absolutely.
imagined 10 years ago that you'd be in a position to acquire 16 doors at one time, but you were patient and you kind of stuck with it. You stuck with your strategy, and here you are.
Yes. And I agree with that. I think social media is a gift and a curse because you'll see, ads or, social media accounts that they're like, oh, this is how you go from 0 to 400 properties in a year, and um, for a lot of us, I mean, that's just not as easy as it sounds, right? Right now, I don't know how I would go from 0 to 400 properties in 1 year, right? And as people say, I have a good government job, and I don't know how I would get from 0 to 400 in a year. So I think for me, I've always kind of looked at, I'm going to do things what's realistic for me and what's comfortable for me, right? And again, like you just said, being patient and charting your own course, because what I do is not necessarily going to be what's best for you. You have to do what's best for you and your, pockets and what you can afford to do, right? And I always agree that slow and steady for me wins the race. I'm not in competition with anyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, as far as your purchasing strategy, what is typically your criteria when you're looking for new properties?
Okay, so I have a little spreadsheet that I put together, and essentially it's an accounting term called payback period that I typically lean a bit more to, and that's essentially what I have to put out because depending on what type of loan product you're doing, if you're doing personal, you have to put down 25%. If you're doing a commercial loan, it's 20%, right? Especially if you go with a smaller lender. So for me, that 20% that I have to put up if I'm buying, say, a $100,000 property, and I know I have to put up $20,000 plus closing costs. So let's round it off and say 25,000. I essentially look at that amount of money that I'm putting it up. I divide it by the profit for the month. I mean, excuse me, profit for each month. So yeah, and determine how long it's going to take for me to get my money back. I like to get my money back in 18 months or less. I may go up to 24 months depending on what's going on. Like right now, the market is so hot that you may have to go up a little more than you would want to. But if it's 3, 4, 5 years, that's the property isn't for me. So I'm looking at. I am definitely more concerned about the profit per month. And again, I focus in Rochester, which is an area that doesn't see like these huge sweeping, increases in appreciation. So I'm looking at more what's my monthly setup. So my mortgage is like one of my properties that I bought last year. I think my mortgage is 690 and each side rents for 850. So for me, I'm like, that's a good, nice little profit every month, right? So that's what I'm looking at. When I look at that profit and I divide, the 25,000 or whatever it is that I had to put down, I want to make sure that I'm getting my money back in 18 months. So that's the way that I personally, focus on the properties. And I put in into my tool, I enter the price for the property that I'm actually, going to go in, the offer price, the taxes. The insurance for the property is very important. A lot of people sometimes will leave that out, and you need that in there. So taxes, insurance, and principal and interest are the things that I look for. I'm just starting to move into the arena where I'm doing property management. It's been like a year. I'm still not loving it too much. I like to be a little more hands-on, but now I have too many to be as hands-on.
Mhm.
So obviously, if you have a property manager, you need to include that in there as well. But basically, every expense, I include that, on my little spreadsheet, and it just spits out for me what my payback period is, spits out for me what my monthly profit is. The other number that I look for is the monthly profit. I don't even mess it if my payback period is low, but the property is, say it's only generating like $600 a month. I don't even want to bother with that. So I do have a kind of a minimum profit per month that I'm looking for.
Mhm.
Um, I know a lot of people say they look at 200 per unit. I think it's hard to have one number for every single city in America, because 200 per unit may be a lot in DC because properties cost so much. But in a city like Rochester, 200 per unit, 200 per door isn't really that's actually very low for, a cheaper city like Rochester is.
Mhm.
So for me, I'm looking at least 350 to 400 per door in the area that I'm investing in.
Got it. Got it. And I appreciate you walking through that. And one of the reasons I wanted to see what your criteria was is just so people understand, like, not only do you have to know the city, but you also have to know your numbers. Like, you have to know, like, at the outset, before you do anything, you have to crunch these numbers and see if it's going to be worth it.
Mhm.
And doing this stuff like this repetitively, you know, it gets quicker and quicker, and you'll know what it is you're doing. Um, Otherwise, you may buy a property that gives you $100 a door, which is not much, which is not much wiggle room.
Yeah. And I mean, after a while, after you start to do this for a while, because I mean, I do it. The realtor sets up a little list for me, so it comes to my email. And when I'm really in active mode of looking for properties, I'm doing this for every single property, right? Putting in the numbers, and the little formula spits it out. It gets to a point where I can look at it and tell, like, I'm not even going to bother putting that in there because I already know the numbers aren't going to be right, right? So you start to get so familiar with it that you can actually start evaluating. Now I still put the numbers in there because I want to know, but but you can actually start kind of quickly evaluating, like, you know what I mean? That I'm not messing with that. That's 140, and they're only getting 800 a month. I would need a lot more than that on each side, to get to the number that I'm looking for my area, right? So yes, definitely knowing your numbers is very, very important. Just as important as knowing your neighborhood, knowing your area.
Definitely, definitely. And where does the portfolio stand at now?
So right now we have 12,
Got it.
12 houses, and like I said, we're in the process of buying 8 more.
So soon to be
So
28.
yes.
Isn't
So
that
yeah,
crazy to
so
think
we're
of?
excited. Yeah, yeah, very excited. It's almost scary a little bit, but
Yeah,
exciting.
definitely, definitely. And so one thing you also mentioned is that you still have your 9 to 5. So can you talk more about that and how just having that has helped you in your journey, and why you decided to continue to do both?
Okay. Yes. So, yes, I definitely still have my 9 to 5. I have worked in the computer science field. That's what my degree is, in computer science, for quite some time now. And I mean, for me, it would take a lot for me to decide to step away from my career, because I don't have a job. I have a career. Like, I enjoy what I do. I've had a lot of upward mobility within my career, and it's definitely helps in terms of investing. Um, Obviously you have to have good credit, but people love, a job too, right? So
Yeah.
I think for me, I have on my tax return, I have the self-employment of being a landlord, but also I have a very stable job. Like, I work for the federal government. I'm a staffer for the federal government. So it makes it very easy for me when it comes to going to a bank. If you go to a bank and you work at a stable company, whether it's a Fortune 500 company or the government or whatever the case may be, it makes it a lot easier for you to get lending. So I never have problems in terms of that. It's very straightforward. Give them give them my pay stub, and I'm good, right? And then at the same time, your income is continuing to grow with whatever your career is. And again, I think it really depends on what you do, right? So if I had a different type of job, I may not be as willing to keep my 9 to 5. But for me, my career pays me well, and I like I said, I have a lot of upward mobility. I enjoy what I do. It's not really a 9 to 5. It's not like I punch a clock, so it's very flexible. So it for me, it doesn't hinder what I'm trying to do outside of work, with whether it's real estate or stock or whatever the case may be. There are days where I have, like last week, I had an issue with heat in Rochester in the middle of January. And you definitely can't have a tenant with no heat in Rochester in January. um, and in my job, I have about 130 people who work for me. And I had two people test positive for COVID in one day, and the office was like going berserk. So I had two crises going on at the same time, right? So that's the time where I kind of lean on my network and say, look, husband, or I contact one of my contractors, hey, go deal with this for me. And that's why I say it's important to really have kind of that trust level with the folks that you're working with. So it helps me to balance the career with having the self-employment of being a landlord as well.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Something else I meant to ask regarding your criteria. Do you typically purchase properties that need some work, or is your preference to purchase properties that are just are ready for a tenant?
So my rule is cosmetic only. I personally don't like, and maybe it's because I think that to do flips, you need to be there. And since I invest somewhere where I'm 6 hours away, like I don't have time to go up to Rochester and sit and make sure contractors are doing what they need to do. So when I purchase properties, it needs to be livable when I purchase it. 9 times out of 10, when I purchase a property, it already has tenants in it. And it may need cosmetic work, like $4,000 or something like that if I want to get it to a certain level, but definitely not something that needs like plumbing, electrical, those type of things that when you pull the layers back, it could be way more things that are needed. I need something that has a certificate of occupancy when I purchase it, and then I just know that all I'm doing is kind of upgrading the refrigerator, the appliances, or paint work, or that type of thing. But definitely not flipping. I wouldn't mind trying doing something like that, either flipping or just doing a major upgrade at some point. But again, I feel like I need to actually be there to make sure that things are going in the way that they should. But I know people who do it and they make a lot of money. Like they buy houses at auctions. Well, I actually purchased one. Somebody bought a house at an auction in Rochester for $5,000, and they sold it to me for 70. Now, I don't know how much they put into it, but I know when it was time to sell that I think they had more gray hair than I wanted. So yeah, so I'm definitely more cosmetic upgrades, but not the whole kit and caboodle.
Definitely, that makes sense. So you're our first guest who invests in like the Western New York area, and so we'd love for you to just share more about Rochester, what you've seen in the market, and in the city, things that maybe have changed over the last decade since you started, since you went back to go and invest there. So could you share more and I guess highlight Rochester?
Yeah, sure. So, Rochester, New York, one of my favorite cities because I'm from there. When I first started investing there, it's funny because the realtor was telling me that they were doing this big effort next to the University of Rochester. There was one particular street, Genesee Street is the name of the street, where it was not a place that I would have ever wanted to live, right? And the person kept saying, no, I'm telling you, buy over there, buy over there. Now that entire area, they built a bridge from University of Rochester to Genesee Street, which means that all the college kids with their backpacks can walk back and forth. That neighborhood is like a whole nother neighborhood now. Like it's gentrified seriously. So I think Rochester, just like every other city in America, is going through some gentrification, some level of gentrification. Um, in general, I think I mentioned earlier that Rochester typically doesn't have the huge swings in appreciation, but there have been quite a few changes over the last 10 years in terms of that. There's a particular neighborhood called the 19th Ward. That's the neighborhood that I actually grew up in, and that's the neighborhood that I mainly invest in. That neighborhood, when I first started investing 10 years ago, it was definitely one where you can get a super nice two family for like 70,000. If you wanted to get something that was livable but not the greatest, you could get something even for like 30, 40,000. And this is two families. Now it's more like you're spending about 100 to 125. So they have gone up. Um, I would say that's actually a pretty good appreciation in that particular neighborhood. Rochester and I would even say Buffalo from that standpoint, they're all priced in about the same price range where you're getting pretty decent rents. A two-bedroom would be about 800 or so for a two-bedroom multi, on each side. If you have a three-bedroom, usually about nine to $1,000. I personally don't really do the whole houses in Rochester because what I find is with the whole house, you're renting it for like $1,300. So you're better, and they cost about the same. So you're better off getting the two family where you can get eight on both sides or nine on both sides, and you're making more money. If you go into the areas that are closer to, you have the University of Rochester and also the hospital, Strong Hospital. They're right near one another. If you go into those areas, it's a little more pricey, but you can get a lot more in rent. The college kids, they're paying like $3,000 for houses that were the hood, right? But it's just gentrification has happened there too. And in those areas that used to be really dilapidated, they've kind of gutted them out, fixed up the houses, and they're renting them to the doctors and the lawyers and the college students, for a pretty penny. So I think that Rochester it's a city that has a good balance in terms of what you're going to get from a tenant perspective. I say that's the biggest difference between Rochester and Buffalo. Buffalo is more of a blue collar town. Rochester is a little more of a white collar town. So you'll get quite a few people who are doctors, lawyers, things of that nature because you have Xerox headquartered there, Bosch and Lomb is there. Kodak is still there, believe it or not. They don't. I think they do more than just cameras now. Then you have University of Rochester, RIT. The Strong Hospital is a pretty big hospital. I think it's like the number one employer, and then Wegmans is based out of Rochester too. And so a lot of people don't realize just how much is there from an economic standpoint. You have quite a few companies there that provide you really good quality tenants. So I think Rochester is actually a really good place, and that's not to discount Buffalo. I think Buffalo as well is a good place to invest in. They're very similar markets, very similar cities, about 45 minutes from one another. So I encourage people to check both of those out.
Definitely. And how does it feel for you personally, just knowing that you are buying back the block? You're investing, reinvesting in your community that you grew up in. You probably never thought that would be the case like 20 years ago. But how does that feel, just knowing that that's what you're doing and that there's a lot more to come?
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting not just for me, but even my family. Like my grandmother will call me, like, Cassandra, which house is it that you own on Thurston? And I have to say, oh, Grandma, it's such and such a number. So I think it's exciting to be able to buy these houses, make sure that they're looking good, that the yard is nice, and you're getting quality people in there. But it's also, I think, from my family standpoint, it's like a little, look, they get a little pride talking about it when they drive past one of the houses and they're like, yeah, Cassandra owns that house.
Yeah,
So I love it. I think it's really important to invest in your community, and like I said, the Northern Virginia area is so expensive. And I mean, I've lived here for quite some time, but it isn't home for me. Rochester is home, so it's great to be able to kind of put money back into that area.
definitely, definitely. And then could you talk a bit more about a 1031 exchange? We talked about it briefly, but just like, talk about what motivated you to go that route. Why somebody may want to go that route. I'm not sure that we've had a guest who is actively in like the middle of a 1031 exchange. So I think this is great.
Okay. So the 1031 exchange, really, I had been thinking about selling the Northern Virginia property mainly because when I purchased it again as that kind of, I'm going to live in it 12 months and then, rent it out and then get the next one. So it was all about acquiring more properties. But honestly, the properties in this area just aren't as profitable as the ones in Rochester. So I was like, okay, I have this property, I have all this equity in it, and, I make like $400 off of it, where I can take this equity, go to Rochester and make, $900 per house and go buy several houses. So it just made sense financially. I had never really thought about doing it until I was speaking to a realtor that was in Baltimore, and they were saying that they had just sold some of their properties and did a 1031 exchange. And I'm like, what's a 1031 exchange? And so I went, of course, to Google University and looked it up. And it just made perfect sense. Well, number one, I get to avoid capital gains tax. A lot of people think that after 2 years you don't pay capital gains tax. That's not true. You just pay it at a lower rate, but you still owe Uncle Sam. If you make money, Uncle Sam wants to make money. So for me, it was a no-brainer that, I would take that money, avoid paying taxes on it, and put it back, into the Rochester community and make, way more money off of it instead of, like I said, making $400. Why not make a whole lot more dollars, each month with the equity in that home? And then I plan on doing the same thing with the condo. So I still have one more property in Northern Virginia. It's in Ashburn, Virginia, that I plan on selling after this 1031 exchange. I didn't want too much going on, too many balls in the air at one time. So yeah, so and then with the 1031 exchange, so you close, and after you close, it's like ready, set, go. You have 45 days to put all of the houses under contract. We sold on November 30th, so right smack in the middle of the holiday. So we had to find all these properties by January 14th. That was our deadline.
Wow.
So it was definitely a feat to have to try to get all these properties during the holiday weekend. I mean holiday season. But what we ended up finding out is that worked to our advantage because people have less buyers that are coming by during the holiday. So we were actually able to get much better deals
Mm.
by doing this in the winter. It wasn't by design, it was just happenstance. So after the 45 days, which was January 14th, we have until I think it's like the end of May to actually close on the property. So you have 45 days to get them under contract and then 180 days to actually close on the properties. So we're actively doing that right now as we speak.
Definitely. I was starting the year off with a bang.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's the plan.
before you know it, you'll own the whole city.
Yeah, yeah, that would be fun.
Definitely.
I imagine my whole family will want to rent for free.
We can't have that.
Yeah, we can't have that.
So this has been such an inspiring interview. I have a couple other questions. So let's say you're talking to the average person who is interested in real estate. They heard this podcast and they're interested, but they're not sure. Well, where do I begin? What are some tips you would give to someone who's just starting out, is inspired now, but is figuring out, okay, all right, what now?
Okay. So I would say the very first one is make sure your credit is right. I have a lot of people that ask me about, how do they get into properties, and they'll say, I have money, but I don't have good credit, or they have credit and they don't have money. I would actually rather be in the I have credit, but I don't have money case, right? Because when you don't have a credit score, it makes it extremely difficult to get any property, but definitely investment property. So I would say that's first and foremost is just making sure that you always keep up with your credit. If you can't do that, then of course you need a partner or something, somebody to work with that, does have that credit for you to be able to kind of break into the real estate race. I think my second tip is I said this earlier too, get to know the market that you're attempting to invest in. Make sure that you know the neighborhood, you know what type of tenants you're going to get depending on your neighborhood. And, honestly, I don't think it's anything wrong with having diversity in terms of the type of properties that you have in the different neighborhoods that you choose to buy them in. But you want to know what you're getting into first, right? So if you buy in a neighborhood that's a D, you want to know I'm buying in a neighborhood that's a D. And my plan is to move it into a better, place. And this is my strategy, right? But you want to know what you're getting into. So definitely getting to know the neighborhood, I think, is very, very important. And also with getting to know the neighborhood is getting to know the price points in that neighborhood. I when I first started looking, I looked at a ton of houses just so that I can get a feel for what's a good buy in this neighborhood. So then that way, when you walk into the door of a property, you know right off the bat, okay, yeah, this property is good for the price that they're asking for, or these people are nuts, like they're never going to get this price, right? So it's important to get to know your neighborhood. And the last piece is probably for me, slow and steady runs the race. So, you can have a plan and your plan may not always just work in the way that you want it to work. So just be patient, keep going. And, again, if you slow and steady, if you buy a property this year and you thought you were going to buy one next year and it didn't work, that's okay. Year three, let's get it. Let's keep going. So that's probably what I would say in terms of, people just looking to get in and kind of get started and, want a little bit of inspiration.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, this has been just a great interview, very inspiring. There are a couple things that stood out. So the first is, when, well, the first thing is you had it in your mind before you even did anything that I want to take this to the next level, and you went into it with that mindset when you got your first property, and the market crashed, and I'm sure at that time a lot of people threw in the towel permanently with real estate, and perhaps you had some of those thoughts going through your mind, but you decided to do something different. Around that time, you decided, you know what, I'm gonna go back home. I'm gonna go back home. I'm gonna invest. I'm gonna grow my portfolio here. I'm gonna leverage my 9 to 5 and continue to grow this thing. And you had a goal, one property a year, and now you're at a position where you were about to close on a lot more than that. But I think it's a testament just to your patience, just to sticking to your goal, sticking to your plan, and running your own race, as you mentioned. So, this has been great. I know our listeners will get a whole lot of value out of this.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. A lot of times when you're in the midst of things, you don't realize, that you are being patient, right? And it is scary, especially when you're going up against market crashes and things like that. So I appreciate the feedback that you're giving, and I'm hoping that my story is inspiring to people who may run into some bumps along the road. Because I mean, real estate is just like anything else in life. You're going to run up against some bumps in the road, and whatever plan you thought you had is not going to execute to the T. It's just not. That's just life.
Definitely, definitely. Is there anything else you'd like to leave with our listeners? And also, please do also let us know where people can reach out to you and contact you if they'd like to keep up with what you have going on.
Okay, absolutely. So I can be reached on Instagram. I'm a pretty '08 investor. It's an ode to my sorority. I have on my shirt that says my vice president is my sorority sister. So yeah, so pretty '08 investor is how you can reach me on Instagram. And in terms of parting thoughts, I would just say let's just continue to build this generational wealth and continue to educate one another and build that network. I'm excited about what's to come, and the real estate market is booming right now. The stock market is booming right now. So hopefully everybody is taking advantage of all these opportunities that we have at our fingertips right now.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for listening to another episode of the Black Real Estate Dialogue podcast. If you'd like to get updates on what we have going on, text BRED to 21,000. If you'd like to support us and become an official patron, go to patreon.com/Black Real Estate Dialogue. I look forward to hearing from you all soon.